What's up, guys? We are back. The Fitness Profit Multiplier here, Anthony and Jimmy. And is your training model broken? We're going to be talking about the story of a failed gym owner. And we know a lot of gym owners, Anthony and I. Jimmy, no, Jimmy and I know a bunch of gym owners, and we know gym owners who have failed, and we know gym owners who are not as successful as they should be. And it's because they're doing a lot wrong. We got on the phone with one of the gym owners that we know and basically told them, like, hey, man, look, you need to increase your prices. He hemmed and hawed over it, didn't want to do it. Finally listened, increased his prices, and instantly became more profitable. And now he's looking at doing a second facility. So it's like, it's sometimes it's simple.
His revenue from it.
Yeah, he did. But sometimes it's all about pulling different levers to make these things work. But and I'm glad we're talking about the broken model. But Jimmy, let's talk about this failed gym owner. I like when you do story time. So let's hear about this.
When I do story time.
Let's hear about this broken model at this guy's poor gym owner.
So there's a few examples in my life, but the most referenced example and the person that has taught me the most about what not to do in my life. There's a gym owner I was working for years ago, and he never really was profitable. And I didn't really know this until I was out of it because I was an employee and I was just trying to make my money and train my people and all that kind of stuff, right? When I was working for him. And he failed, there were a lot of reasons why it failed, but the main reason why his business failed was because of the broken model that he was using in his training gym, right? If in your training gym, you have kickboxing and boot camp and strength classes and one-on-one training and access memberships and foam rolling classes and yoga and Zumba and all of these things, you don't know your tail from your head and you don't know what you're charging for any one thing. You have some trainers renting from you. You have some trainers that are on payroll. You have the Zumba instructor renting space from you, but your yoga instructor is on a trade, and then you get more square footage because you think that if you build it, they will come. And this is the story of the failed gym owner. Okay. You have to have a simple model that is going to allow you to scale. And you can't be running things at a huge discount. One of the main things that failed for this guy is we operated out of a Snap Fitness location. And then he bought the Snap Fitness location from the owners of it to convert it into his own brand, right?
I actually have an interesting story about Snap that I'm going to share after your story.
Oh, cool.
Go ahead.
So then he eventually got the franchise. Then the franchise lapsed at a certain point and then put his own brand up and that kind of thing, right? So from the beginning, it was kind of a makeshift. Oh, did you guys hear my dog? Sorry. We're not re-recording. Hey, sorry. Okay. All right. Kenny interrupted the podcast here. So he got the Snap Fitness, and well, dog people love dogs. So if you love dogs, drop us a comment. Got the Snap Fitness franchise, got it going, and then decided that everybody that purchased a access membership on the Snap Fitness side would get unlimited large group classes for $20 additional a month. He was trying to play the volume play on that side, play the premium play on the one-on-one side. And then what ended up happening is he had people paying $150 a class for a large group. When you calculated it out, $150. And then had the same people in the same classes of people paying $150 were paying $40 for the session, because he just mixed the small groups and the large groups together when attendance was low. And then he had a kickboxing class. And then there was no differentiation between what strength classes were, sessions, as we call them. We don't refer to them as classes. Strength sessions and cardio classes. There was no delineation between the two. So it was all the same workouts, didn't have any plan to his workouts at all. I had to design them on the fly because there was no design, right? Went from having a 50% commission-based model to having an hourly plus volume model to pay the trainers, right? It was just all over the place and would sell anybody anything that they could afford when they came through the door. So, is your model broken? Ask yourself what your model looks like and get it as simple as possible, because simple is where the money is. Simple is where the profit is. Simple is where you don't feel like you're chasing your tail every freaking day and wondering when you're going to pay the rent. And by the way, this gym owner would float payroll checks to pay the rent because he didn't make enough money to pay his employees, because he was going in all directions at all times, right?
Yep. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem. We actually got on the phone with a gym owner the other day, and this gym owner is very similar. Large group, small group, one-on-one, sports, this, that, and it's too many things. So even when they're selling the client in the door and the client's coming in and the client's like, okay, you're showing a price sheet with 7, 8 options on there, client doesn't even know what to pick. So I guess what we're kind of talking about is you have to fine tune what you're selling, and you got to drop everything else and sell 2 things. You have to, depending on the model, depending on how big your gym is, you're either going to have large group and small group, or you're going to have small group and one-on-one. And that should be it. You know, all those other things. So like if you want to do a kickboxing class, make that large group. Plug it in there, just put it on the schedule, and it's part of the large group. You know, don't differentiate it and don't try to charge separate for this and separate for that. Because then, like Jimmy said, you're spinning your wheels and going nowhere. You're basically going in a circle. You know, so it's almost like a ship with the anchor on it. You know, your fishing boat, we'll use our analogy of the fishing boat. You drop the anchor in the water, and then you're trying to go in circles. You're not going anywhere. You can't go anywhere. So it's the same thing. I think the best model is one modality is probably the best way to do it with a premium upsell. So if you have a big space, then play to the big space. Okay, I'm running large group sessions, and I'm playing the volume game. And I have a premium option, which is going to be one-on-one there. So you're just kind of shuttling people into that, depending on your model and how many trainers you have and so on and so forth. But like in our cases, we have smaller facilities. So small group, and then the premium thing for there is the one-on-one. So that's where we sell those 2 things. And even still, even with the one-on-one, I try to still push people into small group because that's the main thing that I do at my facility. It just makes it so much easier, cleaner. So if someone comes in, they only see 3 options. They don't see 6, 7, 8. And by just making it nice and clean, it's going to make it so simple. So that gym owner that we got on the phone with, you know, he had 6, 7 options. So when Mrs. Jones comes in and she wants to work out 3 days a week, she's like, well, I could do 3 days a week large group, 3 days a week small group. What the hell's the difference? I don't understand the difference. They're double the price. What's the difference? I'm just going to pick the cheaper one. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because when there's so many options, people just kind of pick the cheaper one. And yes, you will have some people who just pick the more expensive one, depending on the person you get. But people will just choose the cheaper one because they don't know. And what's the difference between large group, small group? It's working out. I'm working out. You know, and then it goes into a lot more explaining the difference. But then, like Jimmy said, then you have some people paying you, you know, if you're half full, your large group may have the same amount of people as your small group. And now your small group may be like, well, why am I paying so much? I'll just shift to that.
Right.
So I think it's easier if you just have one thing that you sell and then one premium option to follow it. I think that's the best way to do it. And for us, what we do is if somebody comes in who has a real like serious thing, like they're injured or maybe they're a little bit older and need a little more, you know, detail, that's when we shift them into one-on-one. But other than that, everybody kind of goes into small group.
100%. And it's all, and guys, if you're wondering, should you do large or should you do small or should you do one-on-one? It has a lot to do with your market. So Anthony and I are in relatively affluent markets. So we have similar demographics in our markets, similar income levels, well, he has a lot more population density than me because I'm in Washington State, which is not the most populous state in the country. It's not Montana, but but it's, so when we look at it, when you're in affluent markets, small group, one-on-one, small space, because your rent is higher. When you're in less affluent markets, you can get bigger space for a cheaper rate, run the large group because your demographic is not as affluent. They can then afford less, but you can push them to a premium small group product and push about 25% of your members up to the premium small group product from the base level large group product. And people do be really successful in large group products, right? We know gym owners that are very successful that have done really well with the boot camp plus small group option, right? But you're not going to get a lot of people doing one-on-one PT, right? But in our markets, that's what works. So it depends on where you're at. If you're in a suburb or you're near a city center, right, you're going to do the higher premium option. If you're out a little ways and you're in an area where you can get a big warehouse for cheap, do the large group option because you can pack 20 people in that group and the market is going to demand that more. So if you're struggling with deciding, oh, I haven't opened my gym yet, what do I want to do? What model do I want to follow? Because these guys are telling me if I screw my model up and I have all this stuff, I'm going to screw it up. Look at your market, look at the data. What's the income look like? What's the population density look like? How cheap can you get real estate? And that's going to determine what you do. Right?
Yeah, and if you're doing large group and you want to downsell or the premium option is small group, I think you need to keep it small, max of 4, I think, to really differentiate the difference. Because for us, our max is 6 or 7 in small group because we're small group only. But I think when it's really large and then you're going into small, it has to be clear as day for that person. So I think it should be a max of 4 in those scenarios. So this way you could say, well, Mrs. Jones, the difference between large group and small group is some days on large group, there could be a lot of people in there. And if you want more individual attention, there's only a max of 4 here. So it makes it very, very clear when you say that. Because I think even on some days in a large group setting, you're going to have 6 people, maybe, 7. You'll have like those numbers. And if you're a small group, it's the same amount. Mrs. Jones is like, well, what am I doing here? Right. So I think it's just by making it even more exclusive, you could probably charge a little bit more that way too, but it just really differentiates the service. So that was just my take on that. I hate when guys have, all right, I do large group and I do small group, and then their small group is 8 people. Well, I'm sure you're getting 8 people on some times in your large group too. So there's no differentiation there. So that's my only one caveat with that.
Yeah, 100%. In a small facility, you can push the number a little bit because there's nothing to compare directly to in your space. Yeah. So that's kind of the psychological component of it. You don't get this flip-floppy thing where people are like, oh, well, I'll just do this, right?
Yeah. So I think that what do you think is the best model then, Jimmy? Like if you could, I know you kind of differentiated before, but like from a profitability standpoint, which model of personal training, if you were starting all over again, somebody like you mentioned, somebody listening to this never did this before, what is the best way to go about it? I have my answer, but I want to hear I don't know if you want me to go first.
I mean, it depends, right? That's my me. My answer is always it depends, right? Comes back to
Jimmy's whipping out his calculator as we speak right now. He's got to do some calculations before he gives the answer.
I got to look at market trends and rent trends and all this stuff. But kind of like parroting what we said before, it depends on the market. Anthony and I both had a lot of success in the small group, small facility market. Because when you're in, and the reason for that being my answer, I have more experience in it, obviously. But the reason for that being the answer is because when you're in a market where you can demand premium pricing, you're insulated from economic downturn and you're insulated from things like the pandemic, right? We found that we were insulated from those events where a lot of gyms closed for good. And a lot of those gyms that closed for good were boot camp models, right? It was partly because of the restrictions that were put on us, but it was also partly because when people are paying a higher premium, they're normally very gainfully employed. so they can stick with you through those economic times, those economic downturns and upturns. Whereas when people are paying a lower premium, they tend to not have as much free cash flow in their life. And if they don't have as much free cash flow and the economy hits them, like inflation is right now with a lot of people, they may not be able to afford your services, and your services are the first thing to go. But when they're paying a higher premium, they're paying a higher premium because they have the funds and they're white collar workers, right? They're not necessarily blue collar workers if they're spending that high premium. So I am quite rooted to the small group plus one-on-one model for that reason predominant. The insulation.
I'm going to say the same answer, and again for all the reasons that Jimmy said, but I think also for us, when you have a physical location, you're only going to grab people who are in a certain radius around you, right? And I'd rather deal with people who are paying more than paying less, because again, like all those things that Jimmy said too, but there's only so many people that are around you that you're going to get. So, and it's very hard to get to that $1 million run rate charging $150 a month. You need a lot of people for that. And when you get to a certain point, 200 members, let's just say, if your churn rate, which is the rate at which people leave, is really good, let's say it's at 5%, that's a lot of people every month they have to just replace to stay where you're at. So 200 members at a large group price versus 200 members at a small group price is very different money-wise, extremely different. So for me, I'd rather make as much as possible and profit as much as possible and make it worth it, right? And make it worth it. And you're still going to be helping the same amount of people, but now it's worth it because now you can provide those people with better services, better trainers, incentivizing the staff to do more things to help those clients get to where they got to go. But one of the things we totally forgot to touch on, man, and I never did this, so that's why I can't talk about it. But Jimmy actually has a smaller facility, smaller square foot blueprint, but you actually did large group. Mm-hmm. You did large group, and you stopped doing large group. So talk about that, because you actually we talked about only having two, methods. For us, small group, one-on-one. But for you, you actually had 3 at one point. So talk about that. Talk about why you stopped doing large group and what happened since you did that.
Yeah. So we had a large group model as well.
Wait, that wasn't the first thing you did, right? You didn't start with large group, did you?
No. I don't know. We started with small group predominantly.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So we started with
what ratio? I'm sorry. In what ratio did you start with? I'm just curious.
Oh, per trainer?
Yeah.
6.
Okay.
Yeah. So we started at 6. We eventually moved it to 7 because some sessions would be 5 and some would be 7. So it'd average out. And that's kind of where we're at now. It averages out. But there's a couple of changes that we made to make the business more profitable. And one of those things was pretty much getting rid of the large group option, right? So we had a large group option and a small group option. Our large group option was significantly cheaper. And our large group option was included if you purchased the small group option, right? But we had it limited. So our large group option was kind of like an additional value add to try and help convert people that wanted more cardio as part of their training, right? So we had about 8 sessions a week of large group training. And the rest of our sessions, we probably had like 40 sessions on the books in the beginning. And the rest of the sessions were small group, right? And we had some usage. It was okay. Not a lot of people bought it on its own. So it was just an added staff cost that I had on top of my small group stuff that wasn't really converting a whole lot more people, adding a whole lot more value, anything like that. Every now and then we hear from clients, oh, I need more cardio, so I need more cardio options. And I'm like, okay, well, you can use your small group to do cardio sessions and we can program it for you, right? If that's what they want to utilize that fund for. We haven't gotten rid of it completely. But through the pandemic, we were like, yo, we can't do 15 to 20 people at a time. So screw it, let's get rid of it and let's replace those times with small group. We replaced those times with small group, filled those small groups, and made way more money, right? So this is about you as the owner making this venture worth your time, right? So if you can do things that are going to inject more cash into your business for the same amount of output, staff wise, rent wise, whatever, do those things. So I was told through gurus for years, oh, you got to have it set up with small group, one-on-one, large group, include the large group when somebody signs up for small group, all this stuff, right? We still include the large group when people sign up for small group, but we only have 2 sessions a week of cardio. 2, that's it. So it doesn't have a huge payroll cost. There's no issue with it. Some people do it, some people don't. It's never quite full. It just is there because people like it, right? But we had it a huge, way more percentage of our classes that were offered, or sessions that were offered in the beginning. We got rid of it partly because of the pandemic, but partly because those sessions were never full. People didn't pay for it on its own. So it was just an additional session that people were getting that I was still paying staff for that wasn't netting me any positive cash flow, right? So that's why you got to decide what you're going to do. If you go all in on large group, push that price point, push people into it, make that happen, get more volume, right? But if you're not, and you're just going to do it as kind of like a little BS thing that's taking up enough percentage of your business, not a ton, you're kind of you're 1 foot in, you're not quite in that model. You got to have a defined model that is the model you put everybody into, right? So that's the story of our large group model. Didn't really help us that much to have it. We thought it was going to. The gurus told us it was. Didn't.
Debunking those gurus. That's what we do here. And if you want us to help you debunk things that are going wrong in your business, just click that link below and we'll book your call. We'll hop on the phone with you and diagnose your issues and figure out how we can get you to the $1 million runway. But Anthony and Jimmy right now, Fitness Profit Multiplier, and we are out.